Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. Today I will be continuing with day 2 in my alcohol ink series. For today's cards, the alcohol ink techniques are still pretty basic. I wanted to do a couple more simple backgrounds now that I have a better understanding of how these inks work. So I did some drops of orange, red, and purple ink, and then I did a bunch of drops of the blending solution all over the page. And this is on Yupo paper. Right now I'm going in and adding more drops and kind of mixing the colors together a little bit more. I also added a little bit of yellow way up in the corner there. I used a straw here to try and blow on the ink to get it to move around a little bit, but I think I waited too long and it had already dried a little bit too much, because it wasn't moving very much. So now I'm going to keep working on it until I get it to a point where I like it, and then I'm going to stop. I tried very hard not to go too far. One technique that I've been really liking is using a very small paintbrush and some of the blending solution and just gently tapping that onto the paper, and that makes it so that the droplets are really tiny, and I really like that effect. Another thing that I did with this piece was I really tried to keep the purple really far away from the yellow, because I think that a lot of the issues I had yesterday with my piece is that the yellow and purple were mixing together and creating like a brown color. For the next background, I wanted to create a rainbow. I wanted to mention a tip really quick. That red color there, I did end up getting that color all over my finger, and it doesn't wash off very quick. It takes a while to wash it off. I think you can use maybe nail polish remover to get it off, but if you just don't want to deal with that, then I'd recommend picking up some really cheap disposable gloves from the grocery store and just using those while you play with your alcohol inks. So I laid down all the different colors for the rainbow, and then after I got to the purple, I ended up going back to the red and just kind of wrapping it around. And then I went over it with a bunch of the blending solution and started moving around the ink with a straw. Then I kind of just kept adding ink and blending solution, and I kept playing with it until I got it to where I wanted it. There's not a whole lot of technique involved in this one. It's just pretty because it's a rainbow. I've been pretty obsessed with rainbows lately. I've even been thinking about kind of redoing my daughter's room with like a rainbow theme. I'll probably hold off on doing that though until she gets a toddler bed. Then I've got an excuse to do it right, because, she'll be growing up and she'll need a more grown-up bedroom. Rainbows are grown up. I think if I had a craft room, I would probably decorate it all rainbow. Anyways, this background's almost done. I am going to come in with the paintbrush again and do those really small droplets of the blending solution. A quick tip if you're going to do this with your paintbrush, be sure when you're done to really rinse out the brush, because the alcohol can really harden the tip of your brush. Once the first background was dry, I cut it into 3 pieces to make some cards. And I actually cut this panel the same way that I cut the panels in yesterday's video, with only one small difference. The third piece, the one that isn't diagonal, I didn't end up trimming that one down, and I actually used the entire thing, so none of this panel went to waste. I used my ATG gun to glue these pieces directly to the card bases. I glued those first 2 pieces in the corners, and then for this third one, I'm going to glue it in the middle of the top, leaving a little bit of a border around the edge. For the first card, I started by stamping this sentiment using my MISTI, and this stamp says, "Sending you sunshine and laughter." I used my Distress Oxide ink to stamp this, and this is the color Wilted Violet. I took this strip that I stamped it on, and I'm going to pop that up with some foam tape. I die cut the hello sentiment that you see there. I die cut that about 3 times, and then I glued them all together so that that's pretty dimensional, and it makes it a little bit more sturdy. I like to do that when I'm using a die cut sentiment that's white on a pretty busy background. And that just helps, the dimension actually just helps it to stand out a little bit more and not get lost in that background. So I used my Tombow glue to glue this right onto the background, and I used my tweezers to kind of help me place it. And then I went over it with Wink of Stella, and then this card is done. For the next card, I started out by prepping this piece of paper using my powder tool. And I'm prepping it because I'm going to be doing some heat embossing. Instead of using Versamark ink like I normally do, I stamped the sentiment using my Distress Oxide ink. Because of the pigment qualities that the Distress Oxide ink has, it can be used for heat embossing. Because it stays wet so long, you can just put your powder right onto it and then heat emboss. So I used clear embossing powder to go right over the top of that embossing ink, so it looks like it's embossed in purple, but it's actually just clear over the purple ink. I popped this panel up on the card using some foam tape, and then this card was done. For the next card, I did pretty much the same exact thing with the sentiment, heat embossing it using the Distress Oxide ink. When I stamp with the Distress Oxide ink, I use my Misty tool because I do have to stamp it like 2 or 3 times to get a really good impression. Once the embossing was done, I used some foam tape and popped this up in the corner of that card, and that completes all of the cards that I made using this panel of alcohol ink. And here's a look at all of those cards. For the next set of cards, I'm going to cut the background panel a little bit differently. I wanted each of the cards that I made to have all of the different colors of the rainbow in it, and I thought if I cut this diagonally that it wouldn't have all the colors. So what I did was I cut strips, and then I cut those strips to be the size of the length of my cards, and I'm going to use those, and that way all of the cards will have every color of the rainbow in them. So I glued each one of these strips to my card bases using my ATG gun. After I finished gluing these strips, I cut out some panels of white cardstock to go onto these card bases, and I popped each one of those up with some foam tape and placed them on the cards. Now, I wouldn't do this if I knew I was going to be stamping on these panels, but I knew that I wanted to use all die cut sentiments for these cards, so I could do this step right away and not worry about having to stamp on it and wishing I didn't glue these panels on already. So for the first card, I die cut the sentiment that says hello, and I die cut that out of black cardstock, and I'm going to glue it on using some Tombow glue. And I kind of have the bottom hanging off the edge a little bit, and I did that on purpose. I kind of liked the look of it. And then I just went over it with my Wink of Stella, and I had a cat hair that got in there. That happens, you know, once it starts getting warm out, the cat starts shedding and it gets on your crafting stuff. For some reason lately, my cat has been loving to sit on my craft desk, which she never did before, and I'm starting to have problems with cat hair getting on everything. Anyways, I went over that sentiment using my glossy accents, and then I kind of cleaned it up a little bit using my pickup tool, because some of the glossy accents kind of oozed off the side, so I just kind of like straightened it up, made it work. For the next card, I'm going to do something a little bit different with the sentiment. I wanted to give this die cut some dimension, but I didn't want to have to glue a whole bunch of them together, and I thought I'd try a different way of doing it. So what I did is I covered the whole die cut with my Versamark ink, and then I went over it with some black embossing powder. And I'm going to do that a few times, but after I heat emboss it, before it dries, I'm going to go over it again with some embossing powder. And that it gives it dimension, it gives it shine, and it kind of makes it look like one of those like puffy stickers, like the things that you can buy for scrapbooking. And I really like the way that it turned out. I glued that onto my card base using some Tombow glue, and then I'm just gonna set like a acrylic block on top of it while it dries to hold it in place. This next card, I actually did the same exact thing with the die cut sentiments. I went over them with my black embossing powder a couple times, and then I glued them on with my Tombow glue. It was kind of important for me to place the acrylic block on these while they dried because of the way that I embossed them. They really wanted to curl up after I placed them on the card. So the block helps them to lay flat and dry there so that they stay flat. After I finished the sentiments for all 3 of these cards, I came back to each one of them and placed some sequins on them. And of course, I did a rainbow with the sequins. I did 1 sequin for each color in the rainbow. And then after I glued the sequins on, I actually took my glossy accents and did a drop of glossy accents in each one of the sequins. And this kind of gives it a little bit more of a shine, and it also helps it to stick down a little bit better. And that finishes these 3 cards. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed day 2 of my Alcohol Inks series. I'm going to be back tomorrow with another alcohol ink video. All of the supplies that I used in this video can be found in the description down below. If you enjoyed watching, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you can see all of my future videos. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a great day today.